everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for another educational webinar. My name is Corey Daharsh, and I'm here with Advanta IRA to bring you guys today's topic of investing in senior living facilities with your self-directed retirement accounts. Again, I'm Corey Daharsh. I've been with Advanta IRA for 9 years now. I work currently in the business development team, so I do a lot of education, networking, and teaching people how to use these accounts and helping them get their accounts set up. You can contact me. My email address is right there. I've got a specific landing page to learn more about me and see some of my other educational content. And that QR code as well pulls up a link so you can actually schedule a call with me if you'd like to. My guest speaker today and expert in the field of investing into senior living is Radhika Rastogi. Radhika is the managing partner of Relik Capital Group. We've been connected for a few years now, helped multiple clients get invested with retirement funds into her deals in the senior living space. And she's going to bring you guys some great information on that space, what the benefits are, what some things you should be looking out for. So everyone, we're here to really give a great warm welcome and have an active participating educational webinar today. Radhika, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on, Corey. I appreciate it.
Awesome. A little bit more housekeeping before I move forward. If you're interested in a copy of today's presentation, I have it already uploaded in the handout section, so you can download a PDF of all of our slide decks today. And as I just mentioned, we do want this to be active and we want you to participate, but the way these webinars are structured, you will be muted for the duration of the presentation. So the way you can participate with us is by using the questions box on your GoToWebinar panel. I'll be monitoring the questions as we go. As long as they relate to the items that we're talking about, we'll go ahead and review those questions and answer them live during the presentation. If anything comes up that's more of a miscellaneous question, you can still put it in the questions box. Please do so, and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation as to just keep us on track with the content of today's webinar. So a little bit of background about Advanta IRA. We're a full-service, self-directed retirement administrator. We've got about 15,000 active clients at this time, about $3.5 billion in assets under administration. All of our clients' funds that are not actively invested are insured with FDIC at institutions, and all of our clients have a dedicated client account manager appointed to them. Pretty much after you work with someone like myself to get your account open, you then have a one-to-one point of contact that answers all of your questions, helps you execute all of your investments, provides you additional educational information on any investment strategies or goals that you may have. So we really pride ourselves in our customer service and that white glove style one-to-one contact that you'll have. A brief disclaimer before we get too far into any of the education I'm going to provide. I am here strictly for educational purposes. I'm sure Radhika will have a specific disclaimer of her own, but this is for educational purposes. So any examples I provide is just rounded numbers, and you are obviously always implored to consult with your own CPAs, attorneys, tax preparers before you partake in any specific self-directed investment. So what is a self-directed account? It's basically a retirement account that lets you make investments that other retirement administrators will not let you make. So most people have a fiduciary retirement account or an account with a financial advisor. Again, we're a non-fiduciary or an alternative investment account administrator. So we let you hold investments that are fully allowed within the IRS's rules and regulations, but don't fall under the public sector. So stocks, bonds, mutual funds. We're talking about alternative assets like real estate, paper notes like loans or mortgages, private placements or private equity investments. A lot of different things that you may or may not have known you can hold with your retirement account. That's the part of the retirement market that we're here to serve. And to that effect, as I just mentioned, you may have not even known that this exists, which is actually really common. Only about 4% of US-based retirement accounts are actively being self-directed, so not a lot of people know that they exist. And once they learn that, oh, I'm already doing this type of investing with my savings, I can now tap into my retirement account to do the same thing I've already learned about and am having great success and returns with, they start to switch over. And in the grand scheme of things, I also want to mention, out of all the US-based retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, different plans that are US-based retirement accounts, there's about $40 trillion, that's trillion with a T, in that sector. So only about 1.5 or so trillion is actively being self-directed. And for the most part, that's just because people don't know that these plans exist. Your fiduciary is likely going to tell you, oh, it's too risky, it's too volatile. Whereas, who sees anything more volatile than the stock market? They have a vested interest in keeping your money in their hands, where they're charging you percentages or points on the investments that they choose for you. And they want you to think it's too risky to actually take your own dollars into your own hands with your own judgment. So be that as it may, just wanted to share that little piece of information for you all. So why do people switch over to self-direction? I did just allude to the fact that it's a new source of capital. You may already be investing into alternatives like senior living or rental properties or things like that, and find out through this type of webinar that you can self-direct your retirement account into those same assets. A lot of people are getting fatigued with the stock market, which I just alluded to. Over the past 4 or 5 years, it's been quite a roller coaster ride, and some people, if they don't switch their entire account, at least switch over a portion and diversify into alternative assets. And then the tax benefits for making these investments. Keep in mind, these are retirement accounts, so it's not the same depreciation and tax write-offs that you can get for some of these investments, but the investment itself, when held in a retirement account, grows either completely tax-free if you're using a Roth account, or tax deferred if you're using a traditional account, meaning you don't pay taxes on any of the money as you're earning on the investment. You just pay money or taxes on the money when you distribute it later in life, as to actually live off of that money in the future. So I'm going to briefly go over the rules and regulations for self-directed investing, just to give you guys kind of a 30,000-foot view of what you can and cannot do with these accounts. So this is across the IRA account world and 401k world in general. What the IRS limits is basically certain investments labeled as prohibited investments, and those are anything into a subjectively valued asset like fine wine, artwork, collectibles, and life insurance policies. So those are the asset classes that you physically are not allowed to invest into, for the most part because the IRS deems those to be subjective in value. And then there are some coins that you can invest into, but it's more so at the precious metal value, so the actual value of the metal, not the fact that, oh, this is a specific rare coin, etc. The other way that the IRS limits these accounts, the only other way really that the IRS limits these accounts, are by labeling certain individuals close to you as disqualified persons. So you're not allowed to transact with a disqualified person, meaning sit on the other side of a deal. Buy an asset from a disqualified person, sell an asset to a disqualified person, let a disqualified person benefit from an asset owned in your retirement account. I'll break down who those disqualified persons are in just a moment as well. But before I do so, I do want to reference that there are some little known taxes that apply in certain investment scenarios, specifically unrelated business income tax. That applies when you're making an investment in your retirement account, which in theory is supposed to be a passive income generating investment, and the investment generates a little bit or some active income as opposed to strictly passive. So for example, investing into a business like a car wash or a laundromat or something that's selling goods and services to customers may have some active income above and beyond the passive income. And in those scenarios, you may need to apply and pay UBIT tax. Also, if you're flipping houses, for example, and you're doing that at scale, so the IRS deems that you're possibly running a home flipping business through your retirement account, those are examples of scenarios where UBIT tax may apply. There's also UDFI tax, unrelated debt finance income tax, when you're making an investment that utilizes leverage. So you're making an investment into a larger firm as a limited partner, and that firm's going to be doing an investment and utilizing leverage. There may be some trickle down UDFI tax that applies. Those are more niche and unique scenarios. We've got separate educational content that covers them more thoroughly, but at least I wanted to give you, again, a 30,000-foot view of the way the IRS limits and restricts your investments and labels who you can and cannot invest with. To that point, here is the actual chart of the disqualified persons. I'll explain this very simply. If you look at your family tree, the disqualified persons are everyone on the main trunk of that tree. So yourself and your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, your parents, your grandparents, everyone on that main trunk of that family tree, basically your lineal ascendants and descendants. extending to any businesses that those individuals own or control the day-to-day operations of. So those are who you cannot be on the other side of an investment transaction with. I can't own a rental property and let my son be a tenant at that property. Speaking about senior living, I can't be invested into a senior living deal and have my parents actually be at that senior living facility. It's conflict of interest there. Not disqualified relatives include your siblings, your aunts, uncles, cousins, in-laws, anyone that's not on that main trunk of that family tree as I referenced earlier. So I've got a quick case study for how a senior living deal may work out in the grand scheme of things. We've done plenty of these deals. I've handled them in my days as a client account manager with Advanta. So again, this is a rounded number example, just a baseline example of what these types of transactions look like. So they're typically structured as a limited partnership or a syndication deal. There are other structures available, but this is one of the more common ones that we see. So in this example, I've got Rebecca, who's an investor. She's got money with a fiduciary or a managed IRA that's invested into stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. And she meets someone named John, who's got an investment opportunity, let's just say for today's example, into a senior living facility. So John and Rebecca meet. John provides Rebecca the subscription paperwork and the full prospectus or private placement memorandum, often utilized as the term there. That's going to outline everything that this deal is supposed to do. What the acquisition is going to be, what the raise is going to be, what the intention for the project is going to be, the turnaround and when the exit strategy of the project looks like. And Rebecca reads that thoroughly, reviews with her own team, as I mentioned earlier, CPAs, tax preparers, advisors, whomever her team is comprised of, and decides, yes, I want to invest into this opportunity. So she sets up a self-direct account, conducts a IRA to IRA transfer, which is a very sweet and simple process. Typically takes a few business days to a week roughly to get the money moved over. And in the meantime, she also provides that subscription paperwork to her client account manager to facilitate the investment transaction. In this scenario, we're looking at a $50,000 investment, which is a reasonable investment threshold for this type of deal. So again, the account manager facilitates getting everything signed and executed in the appropriate name of the retirement account, not Rebecca personally. So her personal social security number is not tied to this investment. It's all routed through the tax deferred entity, that retirement account. And once the deal is actually funded, the returns may look something like this. John's group pays an 8% preferred distribution to all subscribers on a $50,000 investment. That's $4,000 a year that Rebecca's IRA is earning in returns. In the 5th year, the project's refinanced, or the deal goes what otherwise is called full cycle, and Rebecca's retirement account receives a lump sum payout of $65,000. So this is, to say an example, the deal went very well. Everything went exactly to plan. There was some great turnaround for this. So in total, Rebecca's IRA earned $35,000. That's $20,000 in preferred distributions, $4,000 a year for 5 years, and a $15,000 profit at the end when she had her initial capital of $50,000 returned as well. Now keep in mind that $35,000 is either tax deferred, so put back into the retirement account to make new investments, and the taxes will be paid later when Rebecca distributes it out for personal use, or completely tax-free if this investment was made through a Roth IRA account. It's really simple to get these accounts started up. You just have a conversation with me. I send you an application link. It takes you about 10-15 minutes to complete. Once your account's open, we'll start moving the money over. If you already know what deal you want to make, we can get that paperwork underway. So in about a week to a week and a half time frame, you're ready from the day you open your account to actually fund your initial investment. And without further ado, that covered kind of my 101 housekeeping, basic intro to self-directed accounts. Now we're going to go to the meat of today's presentation, which is how to invest into senior living facilities. I've got Radhika putting her video up here, so I hope you all can see her. Also, remember, I did ask if anyone had any questions. I do see one that's already come up. I'll just address this real quick. Is this session recorded? My wife's unable to join and she would like to review. Yes, if you registered for today's webinar, the recording will be emailed to you within roughly 24 hours, and it will also be posted on our YouTube account. So go search Advanta IRA on YouTube, and you could watch this back at your own pace, at your own time, whenever, wherever you'd like to. Without further ado, Radhika, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. Well, everyone, thank you for being here. Before we actually jump into the slides, I actually wanted to start by telling you a little story. I want to tell you about a gentleman. He's in our Savannah community, so it's a memory care community. He's 78 years old, and he has spent his life flying. First, he started in the Air Force and then went on as a commercial airline pilot. He'd logged hundreds of thousands of miles in the sky, and flying was his identity. But dementia slowly stole that from him. It He couldn't really remember the details of his life or even remember who he once was. Deep down he knew, but the memories just weren't there. So one day, our operations team in Savannah decided to do something really simple. They got him a poster. And it wasn't just any poster, it was actually the inside of a 737 cockpit. So every button, every gauge, every glowing screen was right there on his bedroom wall. When he saw that poster, something lit up in him. He pulled his wheelchair up close to that poster, started pressing buttons, tracing the controls, just like he used to back in the day. He smiled. He started to laugh. And little fragments, over time, little fragments of his memory came back. He told us a few stories. He started to remember a few things. And when his family visited a few weeks later, they saw this, they witnessed this, and they said, "We haven't seen this spark in years." And in that moment, through something so small like a poster, our community was able to bring him back. I tell you this story to give you a glimpse into what our communities can do for seniors in our life. Corey, if you go to the next slide, um, my name is Radhika Rastogi, and I'm the managing partner at Relik Capital Group. We're an equity group that partners with passive investors to create recession resilient, purposeful investments. Investments that don't just provide above average returns, but they also make a difference. Over the course of my career, our team has closed a little over $300 million in transactions across various different asset classes from multifamily, storage, industrial. But in recent years, we've fully dedicated ourselves entirely to senior living because we believe that this is the industry, this is the market where financial opportunity meets deep human impact. Personally, I hold about 350 units across the US. And today I'm going to share my perspective on the market, why it's growing so rapidly, the opportunity that lies ahead for you as an investor, and the power that this space can generate for returns that are aligned with purpose. Along the way, I'll share a few more stories, moments from our residents' lives, as well as my personal experiences that remind me of why this work really matters to us. At the end, I'll close with a case study that shows you exactly how purposeful investments can actually align with profitable investments. So let's move on to the next slide and we'll get started. So if you'd like, you can use the chat feature or the questions side to help me tell me, like, what do you think these numbers mean? I'll wait for a couple seconds and then I'll go into what I think or what they really are. So 1.23, 25, and 73. I'll give you maybe 1 or 2 moments and then I'll move forward. So all of these numbers have to do with the market. So 1.23, this is the market size that senior living is expected to reach in the next 4 years. So in 2024, the market size for senior living was a little over $958 billion. And in 4 years, it'll be at 1.23. That's one of the biggest changes we're seeing in the market in terms of the additional revenue that's collected through the market. On this slide, it also shows you that the largest area of senior living is actually composed of independent living. We'll talk more in the next couple of slides what that really means, but 66% of the market is made up of independent living. But memory care is actually the fastest growing segment. And we're seeing that because more and more people are living longer. And we're actually seeing that of the people in communities today, 40% of them have some sort of a memory ailment. And that's expected to continue rising, unfortunately. Another big shift that we're seeing in the market and just generally around this industry is 56% of US families are dual income now. And with the cost of living rising across every city, every state in the country, it's becoming even more difficult for one of the two income members of the family to leave the job force to take care of an elderly parent or family member. And so the need for professional services is actually rising. And then finally, the last two numbers on that previous slide, 25 and 73, 25% of the market is actually controlled by 5 players. That means 75, it's actually 73 because there's a little bit of buffer, but 73% of the market is fragmented, leaving tons and tons of opportunity and room for small to mid-sized players, operators, as well as equity companies to own, operate, and take a piece of that pie. So we're in a very, very good state just looking at the market. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see, thank you, Corey. So this slide is actually showing how all of the pieces from the market slide previously align with the population growth and the capacity that exists in the market today. So the blue trend, the blue curve that you're seeing is actually population growth of those that are 80 years and over. And you can see the hockey stick effect taking place between years 2026 and 27. That huge hockey stick that's happening is what's driving significant growth in the market today. And you see the dark orange line at the bottom, that's the current development pace. The black bars are what we actually need in terms of units available to meet the demand. So you can just see the difference between where supply is today versus what's needed, and there's a huge gap. So this pressure that's happening in the market with demands increasing, but supply is staying the same or decreasing essentially, is actually creating so much pressure to increase prices of rentals, the care services, prices are increasing, which is good news for investors, but bad news if you actually need the care. I'll actually tell you a quick story where I actually saw this in practice. So a couple months ago, my team and I, we went to do a site visit in Texas. And as part of our site visit, we do property inspection, but we also mystery shop. So we actually went to 5 other competitors in the area, pretended that we wanted to get some care services for our family members, and tried to get as much information as possible on their rents, the amenities, food, everything from the color of the walls to the smell when you walk into the rooms. Everything mattered to create the resident experience. So we documented everything. And what I found was, of the 5 communities that we visited, 4 of them were at 98 to 100% occupied, and 4 of them had wait lists with anywhere between 8 to 15 people on there. So what this is meaning is, just like in this particular example, we're seeing families are waiting to put their elderly family members into a home just so that they can get the care services. And now that we're seeing more and more of a long list as we go across different communities. And this was one example in Texas, but we're seeing this across the nation. All right, next slide, please. So here is, for those that might be very new to senior living, there's a few different segments into what is composed of senior living. And this chart gives a good idea of, from greater independence or completely independent residents to those that require more healthcare support. So on the far left-hand side, you have independent living, and that's the one I mentioned earlier, where 66% of the market is independent living. This is, think of this basically as multifamily apartments, right? This is where for 55 and over sometimes, or active adult communities is also another reference for that. This is where residents have their full freedom. They can go, to different places, they can drive, they have their own kitchens, they're essentially just living in a community, but it very much operates like an apartment complex. Sometimes it looks like a resort, so they might have various amenities from barbecue grills, fitness centers, spas, to just having a room in a community. As we go towards the right-hand side of the spectrum, more and more healthcare needs are required. So assisted living is for individuals who need some support. That could be with something as little as grooming, all the way up to 24/7 hands-on care with grooming, going to the bathroom, showering, helping with eating, going to and from medical appointments, that sort of thing. Memory care is a specialized type of assisted living where people who have Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, or other memory type ailments are essentially in a secure building, making sure that they cannot, just leave the building for their own safety. And they provide 24-hour support from staff. There's nurses on call, and there's more just healthcare support that's provided. And then finally, on the farthest right, you've got greater care. You can think of skilled nursing as a nursing home where you have 24-hour emergent care physicians and doctors and nurses around the clock care, essentially one step below a hospital. All right, let's go to the next slide. So a lot of my investors, when we start talking about senior living, they ask me, well, okay, is it real estate? Is it small business? What is it? And what am I exactly going to be investing in? So it's a business and it's real estate, and you'd be investing in the real estate. So what we do, and we do this through syndications, just as Corey mentioned earlier in his segment, our investors get the benefit and the returns from the business, but they don't directly invest in the business. And that's purely to limit the level of risk that our investors take on. So our investors, we acquire property, they get land appreciation as well as property appreciation, especially since our company focuses primarily on buying communities that need some level of either operational support and efficiencies, or have an ability to either improve occupancy or raise rates. So we always take a value-added stance in the buildings that we go into. And our investors get the upside of getting operational services. So everything from revenue from meals, housekeeping, medical oversight. So our residents get a lot of care, and our investors get all of the benefits of being in a small business. The revenue streams in senior living, there's actually quite a few of them. So other than room rentals, which most people are already aware of, there's something called level of care fees. These fees are a tiered fee structure where if you have a resident that needs very little support, things like medication management, for instance, they might only pay $300 extra to get that additional support. But if you have someone who needs round-the-clock, hands-on care, we might charge, depending on the community, charge anywhere between $1,200 to $2,000 extra outside of their room for that type of support, depending on what state and what city you're in. And that's, again, to offset some of our staffing costs and support that's needed. Then you've got ancillary services. So these are things like guest meals, food packages, any additional activities, any additional transportation that's not included in the base package that we provide. So there's a few different revenue sources that come by being in senior living. And then our cost structure, the biggest cost in senior living is payroll. After payroll, it's food, insurance, and sometimes marketing, depending on where, in terms of operationally, where the community is. Profitability primarily depends on occupancy, as well as being able to create efficiencies in operation. So in senior living, working with an operator that has a good amount of experience, that's turned around properties, is vital, as well as having sponsors that know how to vet the right operator. So in our case, we have selected a few different operators that we partner with on most of our assets. And that's, again, just to be very specific, because we've worked with them, we've seen their performance, we know what they can do, and they have experience in that particular state or city. So that gives me, as well as our investors, faith, as well as just reassurance that their investment is secure. So as an investor, you get cash flow from the operations, appreciation from the land and the business, and then profit gains when we exit the deal. All right, Next slide, please. All right, so there's a few different ways to invest in senior living. There's definitely no one track or anything like that, but this spectrum is showing you if you want to be very, very active and hands-on, there's options for you. But if you also want to be completely passive and don't want to think about this again, there's options for you as well. So on the active side, the most active thing you can do is yourself go and purchase a community and manage it day to day. I would not recommend that unless you have a healthcare background, or you have some sort of a business background and understand all the rules, regulations, not just in the state, but also federally around Medicaid reimbursement. So there's a lot that goes into senior living, and there's certain nuances that have to be practiced. So unless you have a healthcare background or some sort of a business background, I would stay away from that. But if you go into it, the benefits are you, of course, have more control, fewer layer of fees, and you have the most profit potential. But you're also going to be doing a full-time job. On the far right-hand side, on the most passive option that you have is investing in a senior living focused ETF or mutual fund. The, again, benefits are you don't need a lot of experience yourself. There's very little hassle. You essentially, just like a stock, you invest into it. It's very liquid. You can sell it at any point that you'd like, but you also have very little control. In fact, you have no control other than just choosing to invest in the ETF. And your returns are directly tied to the market. So if the market swings one way or the other, your ETF will get impacted, and it has the most layer of fee. So it's really good if you just want something very passive with limited upside. And this is partially why I like to play in the middle. So we are syndicators. We play in the middle because it gives us the best blend for having visibility and control with the right amount of risk-adjusted profits without being fully hands-on. So our investors invest their capital into one specific building, so they get full visibility into the operations. They get financial reports every month. They know the operator that's actually managing it. Some of our investors have actually come with us on site visits, so they've seen the building, they've met the staff, they've met some residents. But you can also be completely passive. So once you invest, you just kind of sit back, let the emails come to your mailbox, and read the updates, and then receive quarterly distributions from the business. So it's the best of both worlds. All right, next slide, please. Yes, risks. So a lot of my investors, of course, ask that, Radhika, that sounds great. Now, what are the drawbacks? What do I have to be prepared for? So there's 5 key risks in senior living. The first is quality of care. You might have heard in the news, in fact, this was a couple months ago in the East Coast, there was a fire that happened in a community where a few different residents actually passed away. You might have heard of other communities where there's not a lot of great press in the news about how some of these corporate communities handle their residents. So quality of care is a big issue. A big part of that is the culture that the operator brings in, as well as the processes and practices that they bring in. So something that we look for as we partner with a lot of these operators is we actually don't go national. They frankly are too, widely spread. They don't usually have enough understanding of the local market or the relationships in the local market. So we like to go either with local operators or regional operators that have other assets in that particular location. That helps to make sure that they're building the right culture. They're actually their day-to-day. They know the staff by name. They're watching what's happening every day. And as a sponsor, we're very active in asking the right questions and making sure that our residents are happy, because that is the ultimate #1 goal. The second risk is staff retention and labor costs. So staffing is a big challenge. In some markets, it's not as big a challenge. The costs are always a challenge. So across the industry, you'll see, no one's paying minimum wage anymore for, frankly, a very emotionally draining job. Most places have been providing much better than market rates, and that's something that most sponsors are underwriting into the deals. Staff retention, though, again, goes back to the culture that the operator builds. So creating an upward path to mobility, having various types of incentives, not just financial, sending them to things like various training so that they can upskill. Those types of things, quarterly bonuses or employee of the year, those are small things that we can implement to keep our staff happy and resilient, especially when certain times, the work gets very heavy. Third risk, regulatory and compliance risk. So of course there's local and state regulations that we have to be aware of, but there's also federal regulations from the Center of Medicare and Medicare Services. So anytime they make any changes, we have to understand what that means for our policies and processes. So again, working with an operator that has context and is in the right circles, is working with the right associations to understand before the policy goes into effect what changes that would bring is very, very important. And another reason why we choose not to go with the national ones, we choose to go with regional that have influence in the various senior living associations locally. And number 4, market positioning, competitive pressure. This actually goes back to the story I was telling you earlier about our site visit and us doing some mystery shopping to understand fully well what the competitive landscape looks like. We want to make sure we're not buying in a location with, 10 or 20 different communities within 3 to 5 miles. We also check to make sure that there's sufficient demand for the type of services we would be providing, and make sure that the rental increases we plan to build in are reasonable for the median income that lives there, as well as what our competitive landscape looks like. And then finally, the risk around operational and financial stability. So just like any other small business, there are ebbs and flows, there's cycles in senior living. Most of the time, we don't get a lot of move-ins in November and December because of the holidays, but it's things like that that you have to just be aware of, and hopefully have a sponsor that educates you around all of these things before you put your investment in.
And before we move on to the next slide, had a quick question that I think we both can kind of answer. Someone just asked, do investors receive K1s? So I think that probably goes kind of into the regulatory and compliance as it relates to, what we're talking about. From my side, I'll just answer, in most cases, the investor will receive a K1 sent directly to Advanta IRA. That'll be stored on file for you for reference, but it's important to note that that is not relative to the annually required valuation that you need to provide to us to update your actual investment value on an annual basis. So yes, we typically receive them and store them. They're a historical representation of the investment and everything therein that's part of that, but it doesn't really have any factor in what we collect compliance-wise on our end. It's just a document that the investment provider usually provides. Did you have anything to add to that, Radhika?
No, not from like an IRA perspective. The only thing I would add is, so if you weren't using an IRA, yes, you would get a K1 directly to yourself instead of going through Advanta, but we would also include things like depreciation on there. So just again, something to be aware of, which wouldn't come through your IRA if you're investing through the IRA. But yeah, we definitely provide K1s.
Perfect. There's one other question that came up as we were giving those answers as I flip to the next screen, and I'm not putting you on the spot about answering this. It just says, what is the minimum investment amount? You can either answer and tell that person to reach out to you directly, or if you want to give a broad scope just in the industry, what they can look at, kind of like my example earlier. I think I mentioned a few times, this is a relative example. This could be a minimum that you could look at, but feel free to address that as you see fit.
Yeah, so usually our minimum is 100,000. However, we have had a few deals in the past that have come in at 50 and at 75, but I would assume 100 for most deals. And then we can, on the next slide is my QR codes. If you'd like to talk in more depth, I'm happy to share, our current opportunities and their different deal sizes or the investment.
And real quick,
minimums.
Sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize.
No, go ahead.
A longer question just came in relative to liability before we bump into that next slide. What about potential liability issues, lawsuits against any of your properties to include regarding patient care, criminal acts by operator, employees, etc. As an LP, would one personally be subject to any liability other than losing all of their investment in the property?
It's a very good question. So the answer is no. The passive investor will not be liable for any of the healthcare liabilities or risks that is taken on. And the way that we structure our syndication, you actually don't buy membership into the operation side. And that's again to limit the risk that you would be taking on. So you get all of the profits through a different entity. It's basically our administration entity called XYZ Syndication. And so you'll receive all the profits, but you won't take any of the liability. So we, of course, carry general liability, workers' comp, EPLI, cyber, employee practices, like all types of insurance. We carry that just to make sure that we are protected and the operator is protected, but it will not affect you as a LP. The most risk you're taking on is essentially the principal that you've invested.
Perfect. And all right, without further ado, back to the slide.
Okay, so here's a case study. So this is actually the same community that I started with the pilot. So we purchased this asset earlier this year. This is a B-class memory care community in Savannah, Georgia. It's a 36 unit, 45 beds, and this one has an interesting story. My team and I, we actually tried to purchase this asset over a year and a half ago now. We placed a bid for $2.2 million and the seller rejected it. And a year later, we ended up finding that this asset was an auction. So we ended up being able to purchase this asset for $735,000 because it was going through bankruptcy court. And because we were planning on buying it a year earlier, we had done a ton of due diligence. So we felt very secure and safe, even though we bought it in auction, to continue moving forward with this. So what we knew was the market rate in Savannah for memory care services is just shy of $5,000 right now. This community, on average, was charging about $2,800. So there's about a $2,000 gap between where they are and where the market is today. The community, by the time we ended up buying it, was losing about $66,000 a month. So there was a significant, our raise was primarily to just raise operational reserves. The all-in project cost was $1.4 million. And we had already vetted an operator, like the operator was ready to go because we were trying to buy it a year before. The operator actually used to manage this community several years before, had already turned it around. This was an award-winning community when she was in place. And she estimated that it would take us about 8 months to break even. We, of course, wrote it to, about 10 to 12 months to break even instead of the 8. And you can see some of the projections on this slide. So the investment was $100,000 for LPs. Our goal is to return through a refi. We would do a refi in year 2. Our goal is to return 100% of the capital back to LPs by the end of year 2. Your distributions quarterly would begin year 2. And by the end of year 4, so this one has a 4-year hold instead of what you typically see is a 5-year hold. And you'd be receiving an additional $215,000 through those 4 years for a total cash flow of $315,000 by the end of all 5 years, including the sale gains. So you can see that up here, right? The equity multiple 3.15. I would say these types of deals are rare because we don't typically have as much insight into the asset, especially if we're buying at an auction. And you almost never see the ability to buy, a 36 unit community for $700K. But what I would say is the way that we vet our deals, we won't bring any deal that doesn't at least meet 2.5 multiples. So if you're investing $100K, you should be leaving the deal with a minimum of $250K. And our goal, again, is always to de-risk our LP. So we always try to do a refi in year 2 and year 3 with the goal of returning 100% of the capital back. We have found that this, again, reduces your risk, but also we were able to do that where you don't typically see that like in multifamily storage or anything. You're always waiting until year 5 when that sale happens to get most of your money back. So those are some of our biggest differentiators and how we structure our deal and why we chose to go into senior living. But this is a good example of something that's live. It's a closed transaction, but something that you can expect if you ever wanted to work with us. Great. I think just the last slide then. I have my QR code up here if you'd like to scan that. I love taking calls with investors, and there's of course no pressure to invest. I use them primarily to just further educate on senior living and why we love being in this environment and this market. So if you'd like to have a conversation, please reach out.
All right, awesome. I'll give a few more minutes for the audience to add any last questions that you guys may have, as well as take a picture of that QR code or take down the email address and website information, or connect on LinkedIn. Just a quick question that I was thinking about, if you want to try to poke at this one.
Sure.
So and I know you have background in other aspects of real estate investing. In the senior living space, how comparable is, when you're prospecting a deal, looking at the property as, hey, we're going to go into this deal. It's a C+ property. We want to upgrade it to a B, or the letter classifications. How is that compromised in this space? Because you're not just looking at the actual bones of a building, but you're looking at the possible operators available in that area, and like you said, the reviews and quality of the actual care that the patients and residents that are already there are receiving, and what that could be upgraded to. Can you kind of expand on that kind of letter classification and how it relates to senior living?
Absolutely. So it definitely still matters, and we try to stay in B-class communities, in A or B neighborhoods. And it goes back to some of the main fundamentals of, we still want crime to be low, we still want income to be high enough, because many times, even if the resident is paying, they don't usually go to different states, right? They're usually coming from a fairly local market. Many times they sell their homes to come into our communities, or their adult child is paying, and they're usually in the next metropolitan, city that's over, so or adjacent to the secondary city that we might be in. So we definitely still look at all the main fundamentals you would look in multifamily, and we also want to make sure, right, the building is not extremely old, because we do have to be mindful of the level of CapEx we want to take on. We don't want to be changing all the piping and plumbing and all that good stuff, because it gets even harder when you're dealing with healthcare needs. You can't just move people to another room as easily. So everything from building design to the location of the building is very, very important in senior living.
And just even in your answer, that brought up a good point in my mind. Obviously, prospecting and the operator side of things is very important, but you're also separately probably having to assign actual property management, like asset management, for these units and buildings as well. So is that a completely separate factor, or do they come one and the same with your operator sometimes?
It's usually one and the same. So the operator will handle the maintenance and the CapEx pieces, if there are any, or routine maintenance even. And then they also handle the entire healthcare aspect.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any questions having come in since I've asked my two questions there. Is there any final parting words or tidbits, takeaway points you'd like to leave the audience with?
Nothing specific. Just, again, I think, as I started with a story, right? I think keeping that in mind is the reason why we invest in senior living, is outside of the market fundamentals and the demographic shifts that I talk through. It's really about serving the elders and making sure that in their last phase of life, that they have dignity and there's empathetic care. So a lot of my mind space goes into that, and making sure the communities that we run are good for them and their families. But yeah, if anybody wants to talk more, I'm happy to take calls and support in any way in your financial journey.
Wonderful. someone did just ask, actually 2 questions popped in, and they're the same question, just worded differently. Are you focused in certain geographic regions of the country? Second question, which geographical areas do you operate in?
Yeah, we actually operate in the Sun Belt. So most of our assets right now are in Texas, Florida, Georgia. We're trying to get into Arizona as well, but those are the markets for right now.
Awesome. All right, well, everyone, I hope you got some great information and insight into the senior living space through today's webinar. Again, you can download the PDF of the slides today or email either of us for a copy of today's slide deck. You can watch the recording that will be emailed to you within about a business day and also uploaded to our YouTube channel to watch back at your own pace, pause it, review it, however you'd like. Reach out to either of us if you have questions, obviously myself about a self-directed account, and Radhika if you have any questions about the senior living space or what they've got going on at Relik Capital Group. Thank you all for your time today. Radhika, thank you so much for bringing your great education and insight to today's presentation, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, Corey.